We've got a packed rest of the afternoon. I'm really excited to get started with Anna McDougall. She's the field CTO at HashiCorp and IBM. This is a topic that I know almost every one of you probably struggling with, these technical interviews. The whole industry is struggling with this. Technical interviews are broken, and AI has made the old formats obsolete here. So Anna's actually rebuilt this process from scratch, and she's going to share with you what engineering can look like on day one of the job. So it's not a, not a take-home test, not a tool that they can pass in 30 seconds. So Anna's going to explain what she's doing and what's making it work. So Anna, thank you so much for joining us, and let's get that energy up. No post-lunch snoozing over here.
Thank you so much.
This was not planned. This.
No. Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you for joining my after lunch session. I know energy is often a little bit low after lunch. I'm a high energy person, so I hope that I can kind of lift you up and carry you through and keep you interested in this topic, because I do think that it's kind of crucial. And I'm going to dig into why, what I think has been broken, and what I came up with. It's called the McDougall Method. And why I think it's good, and also how you can do it differently. If you don't like the McDougall Method, that's totally cool, but I am highly opinionated, so I'm going to give out a lot of opinions. I hope you disagree with some, because that makes it more fun. All right, so this time last year was about when I created the McDougall Method, and at that stage, the idea of using an LLM in a technical interview was controversial. And I was often hearing people calling it cheating. Yeah, that these people are cheating if they want to use an LLM. And this is kind of coming from the background of people not wanting candidates to use Google in technical interviews, not wanting to be able to use code completion or anything like that. It was kind of this idea of keeping technical rounds pure. And I kind of disagree very strongly with that idea. I'll explain why in a second. So I created the McDougall Method, which is an AI-friendly technical interview framework. So I believe technical interviews were actually already broken before AI, but I think that AI has amplified a lot of the things that made them broken. So firstly, I'm just going to put it out there. Data structures and algorithms are a terrible way to test if someone is a good engineer. There is only one good use case for DSA, and that is if you are a mega corporation who needs to cut down the number of candidates from like 10,000 to 1,000. That is the only decent reason that I will personally accept for you using DSA, and any other reason to use data structures and algorithms or leak code is, in my opinion, not good. Why is it not good? Because it's testing memory. Back in the 90s, the early 2000s, using data structures and algorithms was kind of an okay way to test people, because usually they were seeing a problem for the first time. Now they are not. This information is everywhere. It's on YouTube. There are guides. There are books. So it's really just, has this candidate happened to have come across this particular data structure algorithm problem and memorized the solution? Is that a good test of a good engineer? No, thank you. No, I don't think it is, and I don't think you should think it is. Again, highly opinionated over here. So then we get to take-homes. Take-homes are better than DSA, I will grant them that. There are a few problems with take-homes, and it's the same problem as saying, just bring us your own project and show us what you've built. And the problem is this: they are what I call a time test. Who here has children or care responsibilities? Okay, who here had children or care responsibilities when you were fresh out of university in your early 20s? Right, so who do you think has an advantage when it comes to a take-home test or an own project in terms of doing this stuff in your own time, right? People who are younger, people who don't have care responsibilities, and by that I don't just mean children, I mean maybe ailing parents, sometimes there are sick pets, or even people who are very highly influenced or very deeply ingrained in their hobbies. So I'm thinking people who are doing professional dance on the side, things like this, where it takes a lot of their time and effort. And I often hear this, oh, don't spend more than 2 hours on your take-home. Does anyone actually think that a candidate is going to go home and only spend 2 hours on a take-home just because you told them to? No, of course, they're going to spend as much time as they possibly can. So we don't necessarily just want to filter for candidates who have the most time on their hands. I don't think that's a good indicator either, especially if they've also got a full-time job on top of it. And it's kind of the same with an own project. I know that AI makes creating your own projects a lot easier nowadays, but again, it tends to be a time test. Who has the most time to create their own projects on the side? People who have time. I have 2 kids. I don't have time. I'm just going to put it out there. They're 3 and 6, by the way. It's mad. So the other thing is that I believe these 2 things are also kind of broken by AI in terms of signaling level. So when we think about the way we thought about engineers and leveling engineers, we have like junior, mid-level, senior, and the gaps here were often filled by how well they could code or how well they could solve problems with code. And now that we have LLMs assisting, I believe the gaps between these in terms of coding ability are much smaller. So I don't also think anything that involves them bringing code to you is necessarily a good indicator of what their level is. There's also a bit of a mismatch. How we expect engineers to work and what we're testing in a technical interview, right? I'm not going to go through all of this, but the basic gist is we expect engineers to have their own laptops, they're working with their own setup, they have time to think through a ticket, how to plan it, how to solve it, they talk to their teammates or someone in product, they try to work out how to solve it, then they go away and they get it done, usually with an LLM, right? Nowadays, we want them to use LLMs. So why would we try to test their ability to do that job by giving them this very kind of clinically sterile coding environment? Why do we try to test their planning and their ability to reason through problems by surprising them with a DSA that they've never seen before? You know, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't make any sense as to how we can actually find the types of engineers we want to find by creating an environment that is so antithetical to how they actually work. There's also this, of course, I kind of alluded to it a little bit already, but engineering skills are shifting and changing. What we want from engineers is shifting and changing. So we need to change too. And this has an impact on hiring priorities. So we're no longer wanting to test can they code, because that's probably one of the least important questions that we have now for our candidates. What we want to test is, can they plan, review, and reason with an agent? Can they take a business need and translate that into a plan for an LLM to mostly execute and then review that code and tell us why it's necessarily good, bad, terrible, amazing, whatever, right? So these are different skills. These are not the same skills that we used to test for in technical interviews. So in a way, we are trying to find people who are intellectually ambitious, technical generalists, right? We don't necessarily need as much depth in every single candidate, especially not in terms of a specific programming language, right? I do have a caveat there, which is that teams still thrive with diverse skill sets and diverse personalities. I don't think it's like the era of having deep knowledge is over, but I think you don't need the whole team to have deep technical knowledge anymore. What you need, as I said, are people who can translate business and product into these plans. But the problem is you can't translate business and product requirements into a plan if you're not a good communicator who can't understand what the business and product needs are, right? There's a mismatch there. So you need to find people who can do these things. And we need to find people who can understand generally how to communicate, especially with the written word, because now pretty much every engineer is a prompt engineer in some way, shape, or form. So they need to be able to do that, yeah? The other problem is this: candidates hate technical rounds. I don't think this is like blowing your mind or anything. But why? Why do they hate technical rounds, yeah? Because they feel judgmental, unfamiliar. They don't have time to reflect and think. It has little relation to how they actually work. And of course, anxiety reduces performance. No one is performing their best when they're anxious. And there is zero way, I'm not here to claim that there is any way, shape, or form that you can remove stress from any interview process. It will always be there. People will always be a little bit freaked out to some degree or another. So, you know, you're not getting rid of anxiety completely. But what if we could systemically try to create a nicer interview environment without just telling our interviewers to smile more? Has anyone here actually had to have this conversation with their engineers about like how to be nicer in interviews? Yeah. Yeah, I have two. It's a fun conversation, but it often involves literally training them to smile and like say hi. It's quite amazing. But that's only one part of the equation in terms of reducing stress. In order to create this safe environment for candidates, maybe there's a way that we can create a system that helps them to feel more at ease. As I said, you won't eliminate it completely, but just kind of make it a little bit nicer for them. And what if at the same time, we could find out how they work and how they think about problems and code while still being able to level them successfully. Because as I said, this gap between junior, mid-level, senior is getting smaller. So if we're getting kind of similar code from our candidates, how do we actually know how to level them, how to compensate them, how to place them in a team, right? That's the question. So these are, I know it's a lot of like negative talk here, but I wanted to give you the background for why I think there's a problem with technical interviews. So then we get to like what I think the answer is, or how I got to the point of forming the McDougall Method. It's based around this idea. It's this first day of work concept, that the technical interview should not feel like some sort of make it or break it singular moment that is completely separate from the work they're going to do. Instead, it should feel like they're arriving on their first day of work, they're just meeting the team, and they've got their first ticket, and now they need to work it out. Now they need to solve it, right? I mean, I think it's a pretty good concept because, what is it? Very close to the work that they're actually doing. They're there with the team, they've got a little bit more time to think about it, and I'll explain how. I'll just give you a second to read through this. This is the actual structure of the method, and then I'll explain why each part solves some of these problems that I spoke about before. Okay. I'm looking for the moment when people start looking back at me and not at the screen anymore, and that's how I know most people have finished reading it. Okay, so the basic structure is it's a 90-minute interview round, right? 15 minutes of introductions, not 5, not 10, 15. There's a reason. You want to get them comfortable, you want to talk a bit about them, and you want to throw them some nice, easy balls. You want to say, tell me about yourself, you know, just the classic interview question. You want to say, tell me a bit about your current workplace or where you worked last. What are some problems you've solved? What do you like about your job? What are you looking for next? You know, you just, all the nice kind of easy questions that people have answered by this point in the interview process several times so that they get a bit more comfortable, they get to know the interviewers a little more, they feel a little more at ease. But you don't want to go too long on this, and the reason you don't want to go too long on this is because everyone knows there's a technical part coming, and they also don't want to be sitting there like, when am I going to have to do the code thing? So we want to get to that in a reasonable time frame. So then you get to the pairing itself. Now, the key part is this. I mentioned that one of the problems with technical interviews is that they don't have time to think or plan. So what the idea is that you get one of your engineers who's working in the area you're interviewing for to create a miniature code base, a miniature repository based on your real actual code base, but maybe just pulling out 1 or 2 components of it, right? So not the full deal, no API keys, nothing that requires some sort of crazy setup, just something that is easy to deploy or easy to run on their local setup. And inside this repository, which you send to the candidate 1 hour before the interview, so they have a little bit of time to look at it, they will block that hour out because you will tell them this is going to happen. So they will block that hour out, they will take that hour to look at it already. That's fine, that's good, that's expected, right? It's close as possible to a real code base, and the key part is that you create failing tests. So you use whatever your actual testing framework is, and you create some tests that are failing, and those are kind of graded at different levels. So for example, a junior engineer, you might start with like, the box is the wrong color. So the test is checking, is this box green? No, the test fails. They have to go find where that box is and where the styling is and then change it to the right color. Right? Something simple like that. And you could work all the way up here to like wildly large functions. You could work to whole like refactors, whatever you want that kind of helps you indicate junior, mid-level, senior, principal, staff, whatever it is that you want to hire for. And again, you can work with your team to do this. You don't have to be the one to decide. You ask them, what would you expect to be able to do here? And they can come up with it together. So that's the basic idea. And then it's a pairing session. So one of the interviewers is there with them, solving it together, and the candidate is using any tool they want. There's no restrictions. They've got their setup. They know how they like to work. You want them to feel comfortable with their tools because when they're working for you, they should be comfortable with your tools. So by the time they are in this interview, you want them to be working with the tool they're comfortable with. You want to see how they use AI, right? You don't want to hire someone and then find out 1, 2, 3 months later that they don't like AI or that they accept everything the LLM gives them without any question. You don't want to know that after you've hired them. You want to know that beforehand so that you can filter them out, right? So this is the idea. Let them use it. It's fine. And then the core part is actually not the pairing itself, but the discussion that happens afterwards. Why did you make that decision? I saw that you rejected the suggestion that the LLM made here. Why did you reject that? What were you trying to achieve when you asked it to do this? Or I liked how you broke down the problems in this way. I also encouraged my team when they were doing this to purposefully disagree with something that the candidate did, and this is kind of a little bit of a test of how they take feedback. So to kind of say, oh, I wasn't sure that I liked how you let it do X, Y, Z, or I didn't like the prompt you gave it here, I thought it was too much context or something. And then you kind of see how they react to it. It can be interesting to see. And again, this is trying to mimic this idea that it's their first day of work and they have these tickets that they actually have to solve. And you know if they make it through this and everyone's liking them and they're going well, you know how they use AI, you know how they work with your team, you know if they get along well, you know if they can take feedback, you know if they can plan. All of these questions are being answered that will actually give you good indicators of how they'll be inside your organization. So, training the interviewers. I mentioned earlier just training them to be friendly. Unfortunately, you do still need to do that. They do still need to be nice. That's kind of just part of helping people to feel at ease. You know, no one wants to sit there with two stone faces kind of staring at them. You want a little bit of friendliness. But there's two. And I think the number 2 is really important here. With one, it's open to too much bias, right? One person can have a strong opinion and it's just, they might not have the same opinion as someone else, or they might be, unfortunately biased against certain groups or certain people. Maybe someone went to the wrong school or something like that, or they came from the rival city, or, you never know. Like, people have weird prejudices. So it helps to have 2 people in the room at least so you can kind of check each other. The other part of this is that 3 is not good. So 3 is not good because it's too many. Then it starts becoming like a panel. Then it starts becoming a real feeling of judgment. You would very rarely have a new engineer jump in a call with 3 of your senior engineers to solve a problem, right? It's a pretty, again, unrealistic scenario. This might sometimes happen if it's a bit more urgent, but generally speaking, it won't. So again, you want it to feel comfortable. You want it to feel normal, right? It doesn't need to be weird. And of course, the idea is that you are looking at their use of AI with curiosity, not skepticism. So this idea that using an LLM is cheating, that basically needs to go away. You wouldn't say that of an engineer nowadays who's in your organization. I like to think that we're already past that point. When I submitted this talk at the end of last year, December hadn't happened yet, and I think there was still this kind of real struggle, like, do we want engineers using LLMs, to what extent, and then December happened, and suddenly, like, over the summer, everyone was just like, oh no, we do. So we need to know how they're using it before we hire them. And the 2 roles for these 2 interviewers, one is the welcomer, the talker, the timekeeper. They're the person who says, okay, we need to move on to the next part now. They're the ones who say, I'd like to ask you to do this now. They're the ones who say, it was so lovely having you here today. You know, this person, the facilitator. And then the second is the pairing partner who takes on that coaching role, who they're kind of like the person who helps them to navigate this code base that they may or may not have actually looked at yet, but they should have, because they should have that time. So I said, this is like, hang on, there we are. This is my very strong opinion on how things can be done. I don't think it's perfect. I think there's still problems in general, but that's my personal opinion. You might be thinking, oh, it's a bit too much effort. Because yeah, you have to create a separate repository. You have to remember to send it to them 1 hour before. GitHub does not have the ability to time when you send an invitation to a repository, asking how I know. So you must set an alarm for yourself or for one of your teammates to remember to send it to them 1 hour before. It's a little bit annoying, but I would argue the cost, both in terms of time and money to actually create this, is worth it in order to get a good, strong signal on who you're hiring, especially nowadays when you want to hire for these skills. So what else can be done though? You might disagree with me still. Fine, totally cool. So then I want to give you some good options and I want to give you some bad options. The good options, again, pair programming is the one that I've kind of outlined of what I think is a nice way to do it. But I also think the strongest argument against my approach is actually doing graded PR reviews. So this is a system where you create fake pull requests for your real repositories sometimes, where you actually include purposefully bad code. And this could be from an LLM or just from another engineer. And you kind of see what the candidate picks up. Like, what are the problems that they're picking up, but also how do they communicate about it? Right? Like, are they, because some engineers are maybe not so nice in the comments, so it's kind of also testing to see if they can be a bit diplomatic about the problems they find or how they approach these things, especially for more senior candidates. I think it's a good system, especially nowadays, again, with LLMs increasingly being the ones writing and pushing the code, that you are actually testing how they review code. It's a pretty good option. System design rounds are pretty good. It kind of suffering a little bit from the same problem as DSA in terms of being able to study for certain problems in advance and memorize certain solutions in advance. But nevertheless, if we're looking at the skills that we value in engineers nowadays, yeah, I mean, architectural knowledge is moving up, and we need to understand, do they get what they're actually building? Do they understand the ecosystem within which they're working and how this fits into the bigger picture? So system design rounds, I think there's still some place for them. And this other one, which I've not seen as often, but I have heard 1 or 2 places using, which is that you actually send what I call starter questions in advance. So you basically say, hey, we're going to have this technical interview round. It's going to be based around this concept, and we're going to ask you these kinds of questions. And you include 5 or 6 questions that will kind of kick off a discussion. They're not all the questions you're going to ask in the interview round, but they kind of get them thinking about what code philosophies they need to bring, how do they think about problems, these kinds of things. You give them a chance to think in advance about it. I can see pros and cons here, especially in terms of how they could use AI to prep a lot for this and not necessarily bring any of their own opinions. But I do think if they're just starter questions, you have space to then probe into more detail to see if these are actually their own opinions or not. Plus, in general, I think we need to weight the behavioral rounds and written communication, especially when, as said, prompt engineering is kind of becoming a core part of the engineering role. So we need to be looking at, can they do systems thinking? Can they communicate in text? Can they communicate with product? Can they understand business? Will they work well in a team? These are questions that are of increasing importance. I think previously, at least is my impression, that the technical round used to be the make or break round. That it was always like that had the heaviest weighting for an engineer. And I'm not sure that needs to be the case anymore. I think that there should be it needs to be there, of course, I don't disagree, but I think there needs to be a heavier weighting into these other rounds. Bad options. That's an ostrich, by the way. That's the one who's avoiding AI completely. That's the one who's trying to maintain this sterile technical interview round environment where there's no outside influence. DSA and leak code, bad. Yeah, cool. I explained that earlier. You got it. Mathematics tests is another one that is unfortunately still happening. I really hope I don't have to explain to you that not every engineer is good at mathematics. There's a correlation, but there's not a causation here. There are some engineers who are better at music or languages or other kind of systems thinking that comes about through different desires and likes and dislikes in their teenage years. It's not always maths. And to test an engineer on their mathematics skills, to me, it doesn't make any sense. Strongly held opinion. And take home own projects, I explained that before, why I don't think that's a great idea either. There's also this thing of people, and I know deep fakes are a thing, and there's this thing of people bringing candidates into the office. bringing candidates into the office is only good for avoiding deepfakes or showing off your coffee machine. That's it, right? Otherwise, we're getting the same problem, yeah, that we're pulling them out of their normal environment. Eventually, if you bring them on, they will get used to the office and it will be a normal environment for them. But bringing them in there for a technical round, it is just going to freak them out. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's lots of people. It's, you know, where is the meeting room? Oh, I'm 10 minutes early or I'm 10 minutes late, whatever. Like, yeah. So this is my call to action. Try it. Yeah, take it away. Talk to your teams about it. See what they think. See if you can find a volunteer or two who's willing to create these little pretend code bases. It can be quite fun. And adapt it as you need. Yeah, try some of the other options out. Let me know how it goes. I'm on LinkedIn. So when we implemented this at Hello Better, which by the way, I created this process with 6 engineers from Hello Better when I was an engineering manager there. And I've got all of their names and stuff on the blog post that I'll show you in a second. But yeah, we got some really good feedback. Everyone felt it was really fair. One person, the one who passed, said that it was the best technical interview that I've ever had. You know, people feel more relaxed with this as long as you're upfront about what's going to happen and when and how. So that's it for me. Google McDougall Method Tech if you want to find my blog post about this in detail, how we did it, how I workshopped it, why we came to the conclusions we came to. If you don't include tech, you get a low-fat diet. So, you know, best of both worlds, I guess. And please feel free to add me on LinkedIn as well. I'm very friendly. Yeah. Leave this for you.
And,
oh, we've got some questions. Nice. How can this method scale to more senior roles, including management, strategy, and design? I think it's a good question. Line management, I don't know if you need a technical round so much as just a really deep discussion about their philosophies. I feel like once you, I know that there's a tendency for line management and even CTOs to be more like hands-on at the moment. I think right now we need to be a little bit more hands-on in order to understand what's actually happening with our teams. But I think in terms of like long-term, I still think that people management is the #1 most important part of line management of any kind. And if they've got a good CV that shows that they've done technical roles before, and you can have a conversation with them about the tech that you're building and they're asking good questions about it, they're probably fine. You know, I don't feel like you need a technical interview round for it. If you really want one, when I was, I've been in this job for 1 week, by the way. So when I was interviewing recently for CTO, VP kind of level roles, I did quite a few system design rounds. That seems to be the industry standard at the moment for our kind of levels. But yeah, I'm not sure that you really need a technical interview structure like mine for that level. I think this is more for people who are actually going to be in there working with the code, talking to the LLMs every single day. I think that's, yeah, it's more for them. But for more senior roles, like I'm thinking staff engineer kind of level, I think you could still do something like this, but again, I would weight it quite low because I think once you get to staff engineer, it's again more about how they can bring everyone in on their technical vision than necessarily how they work with the code base itself. And in that case, maybe I would even say don't use my framework and instead go with something more like the review, like doing PR reviews instead. That would be my opinion. Yeah, but I'm happy to answer other questions on LinkedIn if you're interested, because I don't think we have time.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
McDougall Tech.
Tech. McDougall Method Tech, yes. Otherwise you get a diet. Yeah.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.